Hina, and I'm a final year PhD student based at the Faculty of Divinity. So I thought what I'd do over the next 5 minutes is just outline a few core themes animating my research. I'm kind of in the final stages, so any suggestions, any thoughts of how to kind of refine this would be super helpful. So broadly, my research is focused on the configuration of religious styles of nationalism in late colonial India. So kind of think about it from the late 19th century onwards, and the specific religious vocabularies and philosophical discourses that were creatively reworked and adapted for the nationalist project, or projects in the plural. So essentially, how were quote-unquote nationalist thinkers in this period drawing on certain local religious and cultural images or themes to imagine and formulate the goal of independence from colonial rule? So some of the broad themes that underpin my research considerations are these 4 isms, and you'll see that I've italicized the ism in each term because part of my research interrogates the stability of these categories, particularly in reference to the Indian colonial context. So the first 2 are nationalism and communalism. So across this period in India, there are quite robust regional and communal nationalisms which don't straightforwardly map onto a vision of the nation state. In other words, the unit of the nation, what, or rather who, constituted the nation, was not conceptualized in identical ways by quote-unquote nationalist thinkers. And the idea of an all-embracing Indian nation, or even of a nation as focalized in specific territories, was not the cornerstone of many of these nationalist expressions. The second 2 isms, particularism and universalism, are, I suppose, the guiding motifs of my research project. And if all of this has sounded somewhat abstract so far, my study of these themes is rooted in the works of 2 major philosopher-poets of the Indian subcontinent, Muhammad Iqbal, often regarded as the spiritual father of Pakistan, and Rabindranath Tagore, 2 of whose Bengali songs are the national anthems of India and Bangladesh today. Many of you may be familiar with both or one of these 2 figures, particularly Tagore, who was the first non-European to receive the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1913. So I'll be taking up this dialectic of what I call the universal and the particular in the works of these 2 thinkers across 3 main conceptual strands. The first is largely theological, which is my own training. So I'll be thinking about how in their religious writings, the relation of the infinite God and the finite self is formulated as a fundamentally non-competitive one. In other words, to be properly and fully oriented to God is not to lose or deny one's subjective sense of freedom, for the infinite or the universal divine is the very ground and goal of the particular self. So here are some quotes of both thinkers which I think exemplify this view. So Tagore notes, quote, "The individual I am, or self, attains its perfect end when it realizes its harmony in the infinite I am, i.e. God." And Iqbal writes, quote, "The true infinite does not exclude the finite, it embraces the finite without effacing its finitude and explains and justifies its being." The second strand is what I've provisionally titled epistemological, which is really considering how these thinkers understand the relationship between the human particularities of art, aesthetics, emotion, both were prolific poets, and the quote-unquote universal or objective truths of science. So in this regard, Tagore affirms that there is something fundamentally different about the reality of paper and the reality of literature. In other words, literature embodies or partakes in a level of meaning and truth that the mere physical reality of paper cannot contain. Iqbal notes on this theme that science is, quote, "a mass of sectional views of reality, and so religion, which demands the whole of reality, does not need to be afraid of scientific truths, for they are partial in nature." Finally, I return to the theme with which I started, the question of the particular self and its place in the global cultural national order. Both thinkers emphatically criticized what they saw as the evils of an insular and aggressive nationalism, even as they affirmed the importance of cultural particularity and difference. So even as Iqbal says here, quote, "all men, and not just Muslims, are meant for the kingdom of God on earth," end quote, he also affirmed that Islam is a particular cultural force with its own sacred history and moral character. For Tagore too, cultural and religious differences must not be sacrificed at the altar of a unifying nationalism. Indeed, true universalism as Iqbal reminds us, does not efface the particular, but sustains and supports it. So in sum, I think these three strands of Tagore and Iqbal's works, A, theological, self-God relationship, 2, epistemological, religious science relationship, 3, socio-historical, the role of particular cultural identity in the global context, gives us a window into thinking about how, for these figures, religious, philosophical, and national concerns stand not as isolated domains, but as dynamic aspects of a single whole, rooted in the overarching problematic of how the particular relates to the universal. Thank you.